In 1964, Tanzania had barely drawn its first breath as a nation when its own soldiers turned their guns inward. A mutiny. The newly formed country, still finding its footing, was already tearing at the seams. President Julius Nyerere looked at the chaos around him and made a decision that most leaders would never dare to make. He dissolved the entire army. Every soldier, every rank, every rifle stacked in every corner of every barracks, gone. "We start again," he said. "We build something that actually belongs to this country." It was either the act of a madman or a visionary. History, it turned out, had a clear verdict. The problem was immediate and enormous. You cannot simply wish an army into existence. You need teachers, doctrine, weapons, and time, none of which Tanzania had in abundance. The Cold War was grinding at full pitch, and every major power was playing chess with the African continent. The United States, the Soviet Union, Britain, France, they all had angles, agendas, and conditions attached to their help. Tanzania, which had loudly and unapologetically opposed apartheid in South Africa, found itself frozen out by the Western Bloc entirely. No assistance, no training, no weapons. In the crowded room of global politics, Tanzania was standing alone by the door. Then, China knocked. Not with conditions, not with leverage, but with food, engineers, and something rarer than either: commitment. Nearly 60,000 Chinese technical personnel arrived in Tanzania. 900 million RMB in interest-free loans followed. And over 6 years, Chinese and Tanzanian workers built the TAZARA Railway together, driving steel through some of the most unforgiving terrain on the continent. It was not just infrastructure. It was a statement that someone in the world saw Tanzania not as a pawn, but as a partner. Nyerere watched the Chinese instructors who came with their plow background, their discipline, their precision, their absolute seriousness about the purpose of a soldier. He had seen enough. Our army, he decided, will be built by these men. What followed on the East African savanna was unlike anything the continent had witnessed. The Chinese instructors did not begin with weapons. They began with ideas. Before any recruit touched a rifle, they sat in classrooms and wrestled with questions most armies never asked their soldiers. Who are you? What are you defending? Who sent the people who once exploited this land, and what does it mean to stand against that? Then came the physical grinding of real military formation, blankets folded with geometric precision, the heavy synchronized thunder of the Chinese parade step, the body learning discipline before the mind fully understood why. From there, the curriculum moved through firearms, trench digging, alternating cover, and eventually the sophisticated choreography of infantry working in tandem with armor. China supplied Type 59 tanks and fighter jets at prices that made the transaction feel more like a gift than a sale. By the time the last instructor packed his bags, Tanzania had something it had never possessed before: an army with a doctrine, a spine, and a reason to exist. The sword did not stay sheathed for long. In 1978, Idi Amin, Uganda's erratic, brutal dictator, sent 70,000 soldiers pouring across Tanzania's northern border. His calculation was cynical and simple. He needed a foreign enemy to distract his own people from the disaster he had made of Uganda. What he did not calculate was what he was walking into. The early days were rough for Tanzania. No army absorbs a 70,000-man invasion without staggering. But Nyerere mobilized the entire nation. And then, with quiet, methodical fury, everything the plow had taught came to life. Within a month, Tanzania had not only stopped the bleeding but assembled a full counterattack force, organized, supplied, and ready to move north. The counteroffensive was a masterclass delivered to an entire continent. Tanzania's 122 EMIM multiple rocket launchers and 130 EMIM cannons turned Ugandan defensive positions into fire and rubble. Behind the artillery, Type 59 tanks rolled forward in formation, infantry moving in their lee, protected and coordinated, advancing with the kind of step-by-step precision that turned a battle into a foregone conclusion. The Ugandan army had not seen anything like it. They broke and ran. When Gaddafi sent Libyan armor, T-54s, T-55s, Katyusha batteries, elite troops to save his ally, Tanzania answered with a double envelopment. 2 columns curved around the flanks of the Libyan force simultaneously, cutting off retreat, compressing the center. The Libyan commander did not lead an orderly withdrawal. He fled. His men left their tanks where they sat. The Tanzanian army drove straight to Kampala, the Ugandan capital, and Amin's regime, responsible for the murders of hundreds of thousands of his own people, collapsed like a building with no foundation. A rule passed quietly through African military circles after that war. Unwritten but universally understood, do not start a fight with an army that has Chinese advisors behind it. Tanzania's reputation was no longer a promise. It was a proven fact. The decades that followed only deepened it. When the United Nations needed a force willing to fight, not just observe, in the Democratic Republic of Congo, when M23 rebels were running unchecked through the east, and the Security Council took the extraordinary step of authorizing an intervention brigade with actual offensive mandate, Tanzania sent troops. In complex jungle terrain, alongside South African forces, they used artillery and air support to break M23 and force a surrender. In Lebanon, Tanzanian peacekeeping rotations built a reputation for discipline that other contributing nations measured themselves against. Tanzania established a defense industries corporation and began assembling its own armored vehicles. A sovereign military-industrial capacity so rare in Africa, it places Tanzania in a category almost entirely its own. When militants began destabilizing northern Mozambique, Tanzanian force projection crossed the border before the crisis could cross Tanzania's. The greatest misconception about Tanzania's military is that its success came from Chinese hardware. The weapons mattered, but they were never the point. What Nyerere's generation absorbed from the plough was something more durable than any tank or artillery piece. It was the conviction that an army must know why it exists. Since that founding era, Tanzania's military has remained under firm civilian government control. It runs its own military academies, its own peacekeeping training centers, and trains the soldiers of neighboring nations. It conducts joint exercises with U.S. Special Forces and, as recently as 2024, drilled again alongside the Chinese military, the original bond renewed with new equipment and new doctrine. What Tanzania built from the wreckage of a 1964 mutiny is not simply an effective fighting force. It is proof of what a nation becomes when it refuses to be anyone's pawn, when it chooses its partnerships with care, and when it understands that the soul of an army, its discipline, its belief, its answer to the question of who it fights for, is the one weapon that cannot be imported, cannot be blockaded, and cannot be taken away.